All right. Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I see folks are coming in here. So welcome to the Florida Humanities webinar, Funding Opportunities from Florida Humanities for Arts Organizations. So we are so excited to have you here. If you are a repeat applicant to Florida Humanities grants or programs, lovely to see you again. I do see some familiar names popping in the attendees list. And then if you are brand new to Florida Humanities and we have not chatted before, or you have not applied for a grant or here, this is a great about all the different funding opportunities that we have. So typically we offer tips and tricks trainings that dive into one or the other, but today we're going to talk about quite a few of them. So you are in luck. So again, thank you so much for joining. My name is Lindsay Morrison. I'm the grants director here at Florida Humanities, and I am joined today by two lovely people. One is our grants coordinator, Stephanie Chill. She comes also from the arts background, actually, and is here to help, assist us through this process. She works a lot of day-to-day on our closing of grants, our awarding of grants, a lot of the communication with project directors, and also manages entirely one of our grant programs, which we will talk about today. And then we also have Dr. Amy Galpin, who comes to us from the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum at FIU. So she will be here to speak specifically about one of our grant programs and a grant she was awarded through it. So we're very excited to have an actual applicant who has successfully awarded funding to talk a little bit about her experiences. So as we're going through today, if you have any questions, we are doing a Q&A at the very end. So I'll just ask that you put in your questions to that Q&A feature that you'll see at the bottom of your screens, I believe that's where it is. And we'll get to them at the end. So I just ask that you don't put them in chat because those chat questions appear for everybody. And but the Q&A will allow us to filter them, and Stephanie will help facilitate that at the very end. And also, if you do have to sign off, this is being recorded and we will send it out to everybody at the end as well. So getting started, what are we covering today? We're going to go a little over who Florida Humanities is, what we are about, and what we fund. Then we're going to dive right into the arts and the humanities, how they are different from each other according to our definition, which comes from the National Endowment for the Humanities. But more importantly, how they are aligned and how there is such synergy between the arts and humanities, and how some really great programming can happen when both of them are aligned. And don't worry if it's a little bit, nebulous. We're going to go into some real world examples of how the arts and the humanities have been aligned through some truly fantastic programs. Of course, Dr. Galpin will present on her project. We'll also give an overview of our current funding opportunities that are available to arts organizations for you to apply for. And I'll also show you the whole menu of funding opportunities that we have in case there's anything else that we do not go over, but we're going to hit on 3 in particular. And at the very end, we'll dive into a Q&A where we'll get to some of your hot questions. So first off, who is Florida Humanities? We are the statewide affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We are a separate nonprofit organization, although we are state funded and federally funded. And so our purpose is to preserve, promote, and share the history, literature, culture, and personal stories that offer Floridians a better understanding of themselves, their communities, and their state. So every state actually has a humanities nonprofit council. Michigan has one, Hawaii has one, and we are Florida's. So our drive and our mission is to re-grant dollars, specifically the grants that I manage, re-grant dollars that come from the National Endowment from the Humanities, so the federal government, and re-grant them out to nonprofits across the state of Florida, cultural organizations, public institutions like yours to support great humanities programming. So we consider ourselves a steward of these public dollars. They are not ours, so we do not want to act like a gatekeeper. We try to be accessible and friendly and available to you to help you throughout the grant making process. So one question we get a lot is, what are the humanities? And while the disciplines can be broad, you'll see here we have them listed out: history, literature, poetry, culture, languages, law, folklore, political science, anthropology, which is the subset that I come from, archaeology, and civics. What it really can be boiled down to Humanities is the process of pursuing an understanding of our shared human experience. And through the exploration of the humanities, we learn how to think creatively and critically, to reason, and to ask questions. So more simply put, the humanities are those academic disciplines that study human society and culture. And they're really a list of subjects that we saw in the previous slide that are humanistic in value, and they all share a critical or speculative methods of inquiry. And all of them, each of them, are grounded in a historical perspective and seek to enlarge of understanding what it means to be human. So what is public humanities programming? And this is an important distinction, because while all the projects that we support must be aligned with one of the disciplines of the humanities, for example, history or philosophy or literature or poetry, what we fund is that public engagement of those humanities disciplines with the larger general public. So when you are creating active learning experiences like talkbacks, film screenings, panel discussions, Q&As, community conversations, it's those opportunities to facilitate constructive dialogue, put that little light bulb above people's heads, that aha moment that I did not understand that before. Now, with this great programming that I attended, I understand other people's lived experiences better. I'm more empathetic to my neighbor. I'm more understanding of myself and how I came to be, the way that I think, the way that I exist. That is the beauty of humanities programming. And that is the wonderful thing that, that humanities programming can bring to some great art projects, theater, dance, art exhibitions. It dives a little deeper into those tricky questions that we all just need to grapple with a little bit more. So the arts and the humanities, why do we make a distinction between them? If you actually look up in Wikipedia, you'll see the definition of humanities includes the arts, and so it can work the arts. So what's going on there? Well, in 1965, this is the only policy slide that I'll mention here, but Congress created the National Foundation of the Arts and the Humanities Act, which created two federal entities, the National Endowment for the Arts, which you are all very likely familiar with, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And under the National Endowment for the Humanities, Florida Humanities was created, as well as all those other nonprofit Humanities Council organizations I mentioned in the beginning. So we were created in 1973. Our job is to re-grant those NEH dollars to support humanities programming. So there are other arts councils throughout Florida that can support more art-centered topics, such as creating murals or funding theatrical performances or dance or symphonies, ballets, or operas. What we fund is that public humanities programming that leans on the disciplines of the humanities to bring about that aha moment, that light bulb moment. So the humanities, let's dig into that a little bit, because what the humanities do is it's really easiest to understand when you're thinking about a specific art component, like an artwork, a painting, dance, text, theatrical performance. The humanities really ask us to dig in and reflect, to critique, and to contextualize those artworks. And the arts are really a powerful tool for humanities program. And they also use us, or they're also used to help us understand and express a human experience. The things we call the arts, like theater, dance, music, visual art forms, are very much intertwined with and are often influenced by the things we call the humanities. And to keep it very simple, sometimes we could say the arts are the act of doing the part, and the humanities are the act of talking about it. So when you're in doing a program and you have an art exhibition, what we're often going to ask you as the grant managers are, how are you engaging the public in that dialogue and that discussion with humanities scholars to get at that larger, broader truth and understanding about the subject matter? So as Rachel said here, who is an artist, lawyer, and teacher, one way of looking at it is to see art, or the creation of it, is to participate in the experience of being human. The humanities call us to bear witness to the process of questioning and to learn how to ask better, deeper, more careful questions. So now that we've took a look at some of the differences and similarities between the arts and the humanities, how they can work together, what does this mean for a real world example of the humanities, and how is that seen in the types of programs that we support and what we don't support? So let's look at one example. Say you are a performing arts or theater organization. That is mainly what you do. And you want to come to us for funding around a theatrical performance. So some of the costs you might need funding for include costumes, script writing, hiring actors, lighting, or set design. Those items would be more artistic components that you would want to seek funding for from an arts organization for. What Florida Humanities would be able to fund is that complementary public humanities programming. Maybe you want to bring on a panel discussion with humanities scholars to be in conversation with the script writers or some of the actors, and dive into some of those deeper humanities themes that was persistent throughout the performance. And one example of this is we recently funded, which was truly a very unique and exciting grant that we funded, but it was the study of Christmas tree farms throughout Florida. And while they were going to create an original play, which involved actors, lighting and design, writing the script, they came to Florida Humanities to collect oral histories from actual Christmas tree farmers throughout Florida, and then bring them in for a panel discussion, a Q&A with the audience. They actually were doing a behind the scenes tour, and they're also going to do some short videos on the theatrical performance and screen it out for other people to see. So the element that we supported was that broader truth and understanding, that broader analysis and interpretation component that helped the public understand more about the play that they were seeing. Another example would be symphonies or dance. While we would not support those more artistic components like writing the score, musicians, dancers, lighting, or costumes, maybe you want to have a series of, again, a panel discussion after that one performance, or maybe you want to have a lecture series outside of that symphony or that dance, that ballet or that opera that dives into the history of the topic that is in the dance performance, or maybe the history of dance itself. So you're going to bring in a humanities scholar like a professor of history or a professor of musicology to kind of bounce off ideas with each other and provide that additional contextual layer. So that would be the complementary public humanities programming that goes along with the more artistic component. And the third example, which is the one that we see most often through our community project grants program and our other grants programs, are art exhibitions. And we love them because there's such great ways to weave in humanities programming with them. So some things that are part of the art exhibition that we would not be able to necessarily fund, maybe the fabrication of the art exhibition itself, the printing of photographs, creation of or painting of a mural, so those painting fees, the artist fees, or artist and residence fees, if that's what your nonprofit does. What we would be able to support is if you are weaving in maybe a contextual panel that talks about the history of that art, maybe something that opens up the entire art exhibition that thematically weaves in some elements of history, heritage, or culture. Or maybe you want to have a film screening and a panel discussion one night or on a series of nights, maybe one every month for 5 months, where you're bringing in the artists or humanities scholars, subject area experts, and community experts to facilitate great discussion and dialogue with the general public. That component, the public humanities component, is what you could come to us for support for. And one example of this would be, this is 3 years ago, and I attended this in person. This is the Polk Museum of Art in Polk County. And what they did is they hosted an artist, and they had an art exhibition on the art of social justice. And it was on the Freedom Riders, where this artist did sketches, and I believe it was drawings of people who were arrested during the freedom rides. And so what they did for our grant, they came to us to say, hey, we want to bring in humanities scholars, show this PBS films that talks about the civil rights movement, and actually also bring in experts, people who were involved in the civil rights demonstrations in the 1960s. And it was that panel discussion, that film screening, that Q&A with the audience, which was such a profound experience where people could come in, see the exhibition, participate in that Q&A and that talk back. That was that component that we could support, that other humanities, public humanities programming. So now that we've looked at some real world examples, let's go through some of the funding opportunities that Florida Humanities offers, if any of these are of interest to you. So if you go on our website, you will notice that there are currently 7 funding opportunities available. And if you go, whoa, that's a lot, which one is for me? That's what we're here for right now. But I just wanted to show them all to you in case there was anyone that you wanted to go back to and kind of read a little bit more. So while there are 7 up here, we have a book festival grant, a Florida Talks, we have a big Smithsonian exhibition if you had the space and time to bring that in, a program on literacy for families, and a media grant that's up to $50,000, our largest one yet, and 2 public media or 2 public humanities programming type grants. But these 3 other ones we're going to go over today: community project grants, which is the one that I really want you to focus on because we see most of our funding from arts organizations come through this, and this is able to support the most. We also have greater good, humanities and academia, which I will go over, and our more templated Florida Talks, if you just want to put the toe in the water for humanities programming. So community project grants. This grant program offers up to $10,000 to support locally based driven public humanities programming. Just like any grant program, while this one is more reactive to the needs of your local community, that is, it's not templated. We don't say, we want to see this project and see if yours matches ours. We offer funding to support locally driven projects. But through all of them must hit on these 4 areas. 1, they have to be rooted in 1 or more disciplines of the humanities. Those are those disciplines that I had up on that earlier slide. Every project must involve humanities scholars or other subject area experts in all phases of the project. Humanities scholars we define as those individuals who have a higher degree in a humanities discipline, like someone who has a PhD in history that maybe is a professor of history at a local university, or maybe they are the executive director of a local historical society, someone who has that higher level of scholarship in a humanities discipline. But we also love to see community experts, subject area experts. Maybe that is a marine biologist. If you have an art exhibition on the impacts of water in Florida, that could be the artist or a musician in your concert. But we do need to see humanities scholars involved in your project as well. All projects must deepen the public understanding of significant humanities questions. And this is very important: facilitate constructive dialogue with the public. How are you engaging in that aha moment? How are you inspiring people? How are you facilitating that Q&A? And then all projects must be free or not cost prohibitive, because we really see the great need to have humanities programming available to all, no matter their means, abilities, resources, socioeconomic standing. We want to make these programming accessible. So $20 tickets to attend programs is unfortunately cost prohibitive. However, if you need to charge, a $5 fee per person, that is more in the lines of what we could fund, what would be considered not cost prohibitive, because a family of 4 could attend for $20 or less. Another typical thing we see is maybe you want to have a series of performances. You make one of them free or donation based, and that would be more in line with what we could support. So now I wanted to bring in one of our panelists that I mentioned, Dr. Amy Galpin, and she is going to talk about her community project grant, Documenting History, Acknowledging a Legacy, Miami Black Arts Workshop Community Conversations. So Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's so nice to be here with you all today, and I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to tell you about our work at the Frost Art Museum with the Miami Black Arts Workshop and our successful application for a grant to support programming. Our work with the Miami Black Arts Workshop came out of an exhibition on Coconut Grove. It was called Place and Purpose, Art Transformation in Coconut Grove. It looked at the 1960s to the early 90s in the Grove. I don't know how many of you have joined the call that are from South Florida or the Miami area, but perhaps many of you know that Coconut Grove is a historic community here in Miami. In fact, some of the earliest buildings were built by Bahamians in Coconut Grove, some of the earliest buildings in South Florida. In the 60s, Coconut Grove became quite an artistic space. There was music, there was dance, there was theater, and there was visual arts. And there's a saying here in Miami that we don't always do a great job of documenting our history. So our museum wanted to do a visual arts exhibition that celebrated the work of artists living in the Grove. And there were audio components, there were historic documents in the exhibition as well. But what became the heart of the exhibition was the Miami Black Arts Workshop. As I dug more and more into archival information at the Miami-Dade Public Library, among other sources, I was really interested in how the story of the Miami Black Arts Workshop had seldomly been told in Miami. The Miami Black Arts Workshop was started by a group of college students from the University of Miami. They wanted to make art, but they wanted to make art in service of the community. So they rented a storefront space in West Coconut Grove, and they started making art there. They had teen programs for local kids, a free lunch program, and the West Coconut Grove, where the Miami Black Arts Workshop is located, is a historic Black community. It's a community that's undergoing extensive gentrification and a variety of challenges. And so it was an important way for us to talk about contemporary issues in Miami and to acknowledge these artists. And I think the title of our grant, it was very straightforward, but we were trying to actively document history and acknowledge the role of these artists in our community. You're looking here at reference to the Zoom panel and also a work by Jean Tinney that we borrowed from the Miami-Dade Public Library. We could go to the next slide if you like. One of the things that was really key and why I sought funding through the Florida Humanities Council is normally a panel discussion for us might be 3 people. We have one this weekend, it's myself and 2 artists. And so for us, we're paying panelists $300 to $500 each, preferably $500 for their participation, and to have 4 artists. So we were able to have 4 members of the Miami Black Arts Workshop on our panel discussion. 4 of them you see here: Dini Zulu, Jean Tinney, Roland Woods, Kabuya, Pamela Bowen Sappho, and Robert McKnight. We also wanted to have a scholar. So Dr. Alex Cornelius, who has a PhD in history, has a joint appointment at Florida International University in history and in gender and women's studies. So already that was 5 people and a lot more than we could normally spend on such a panel. We were also able to welcome Dr. Valerie Patterson, who's a professor of African and African diaspora studies and who went to the Miami Black Arts Workshop as a teenager. So I'm showing you photos here of our panelists and then also 2 historic photos of Roland Woods. And throughout the discussion, we had images of artwork, images of the exhibition. We also had historic photographs. And we started the discussion with a screening of a film that's in progress, a documentary film on the Miami Black Arts Workshop that's being made by educator Marie Vickles and artist William Cordova. And that was another cost. I don't like to ask artists or anyone to do anything for free. So we also had a screening fee to show that film. We can go to the next slide if you like. Thank you. So this is actually a picture from the day of the opening of Kabuya, Pamela Bowen Sappho, and also Roland Woods. And that's t-shirts that Roland and his partner Jennifer Woods made for all of the members of the Miami Black Arts Workshop that came to our museum that day. And you're seeing here a painting by Kabuya called After Hours, My Magic Pours Secret Libations. Another aspect of our Florida Humanities Council grant that we were able to fund was a virtual tour that also had didactics in the tour. So in terms of creating accessibility, you can go to our website, frost.fiu.edu. You can go to the Coconut Grove webpage or under digital experiences, and you can tour this exhibition. It serves as an archive, a legacy of the exhibition. It was a way, the show happened during the pandemic. We were able to visit a lot of classes virtually with that tour, and we continue to use it as a resource to talk about this exhibition that was really significant to us. I don't know if that helps to give a little bit of a summary. If you'd like me to expand a little bit more, just wait until questions.
Thank you, Amy. No, I think that was perfect. I do see some questions coming in, but we'll take them at the very end to try to move through this for all. But no, thank you. It really is helpful to hear the work that you did, and we were very thrilled to support this project. So if you are interested in a project like Dr. Galpin's or another one that we mentioned, maybe with dance or theater or another art exhibition, we do have 2 remaining deadlines for community project grants for later this year. The next deadline is July 20th, 2022. All deadlines are at noon, so keep aware of that. And then the following deadline is October the 12th. We normally have 4 deadlines per year. So if you're looking maybe at applying next year, we'll have one in January, one in April, and then July and October. We're probably going to keep on that same schedule. So these are also 1-year grants. And if you request the full $10,000, you can request 90% of the funds up front. So you can get a lot of the dollars up and out the door and go and support your work if you're an organization that is maybe more strapped financially. And the application we believe is more streamlined than some other applications, but we're very happy to answer any questions that you have and walk that path with you. Answer all emails, have multiple phone or Zoom calls. We are here for you. So the next steps, if you're interested in a community project grant, read the guidelines, which are online. And I will send after this webinar a link not only to the recorded webinar, but all the resources that we've mentioned. We have a recorded webinar that's 1 hour that goes into tips and tricks of how to apply for this grant in particular. And please do contact me to discuss your programming. Happy to have a phone call or a Zoom call to go through that. I also wanted to mention another grant that we have. It's called Greater Good Humanities in Academia. And I saw a few people that were signed up for this webinar came from the education sector, maybe a college or university. This grant program is exclusively for Florida colleges and universities, and it supports public humanities programming, just like community project grants. So the purpose of this is to support some great academic scholarship happening at our university level that reaches both within and beyond the campus community. So we really want to help you bring your research out to the community, get people involved, and produce some really bold, impactful programming that way. So the contact for this grant is actually on this call, Stephanie Chill. She's our grants coordinator. So if you are interested in funding, our next deadline will be September 28th. At this time, funds for this grant opportunity are up to $5,000, but do sign up for our e-news because we may be adjusting that. I can't say anything more at this point, but the next steps are to read the guidelines, of course, and contact Stephanie for any questions that you might have. And this grant does require an access code since the eligibility is limited. So you will need to contact her to get that and discuss your grant project. So maybe hearing these a little bit, you're saying, wow, my plate is full. I just don't know if I have the time to do a full community project grant, a full Greater Good Humanities Academia grant. What is there for me if this is the case? We have a great templated program called Florida Talks, which allows you to contract directly with a list of speakers, over 30 speakers that are on what's called our speakers directory. And you can bring them directly to your organization to put on great humanities programming. We have people like Dr. Gary Mormino, Craig Pittman, Victoria Machado, humanities scholars, journalists, really world-renowned speakers that can talk to you about great Florida-specific humanities content. And the good news is that we have contracted and have an agreement with all of these speakers. They have agreed to a rate to charge no more than $300 honoraria that we will pay directly to the speaker. We'll also provide marketing kits, survey materials, compiled responses, and copies of our forum magazine. All you have to do is pay their travel and any other costs associated with the project. So again, this is just a very easy way to bring in great humanities programming. It won't be likely tailored to your projects that you're doing. That's the unique thing about community project grants, is that you can bring in other humanities scholars or speakers that maybe are very closely aligned to the arts projects that you're doing. But if you just want to bring in some great content and speakers into your itinerary for the next year, Florida Talks is your grant. So the contact for this is Miss April Myers-Koff. She is our public programs coordinator. She'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And if you are interested, we actually have another webinar if you want to join this Friday, June 17th at 10 a.m. Again, I will send that link in an email to all after this webinar, so you'll have that in your inbox. So now that we've gone over our funding opportunities that we have available that support the arts and the humanities, we're going to start off with some great Q&A. So our panelists are here, Stephanie and Amy. And while Stephanie is going to go look through the Q&A to try to ask us some of these questions, I'm going to toss it over to Amy first with a question of my own. So Amy, can you talk a little bit about how this artist workshop, the panel discussion that you had, I know you mentioned that you were able to expand your panel and compensate them, but can you talk a little bit about the subject matter that the humanities scholars and the artists engaged in and how that complemented your art exhibition when you were diving into those different humanities themes?
Absolutely. You know, the Miami Black Arts Workshop was founded in 1969 on the campus of, as I mentioned, by students at the University of Miami. And it was a time when these artists were protesting outside of the Lieu Art Museum because the museum was not presenting enough work by Black artists. And so our panel was able to talk about the civil rights movement. It was able to talk about racial injustice in Miami and various protests, community action. It was also able to touch on environmental issues. I mentioned gentrification. Coconut Grove is known for its leafy environs and how much it has changed over time. But it was also able to think about the Miami Black Arts Workshop on a national stage. So to think about it in terms of an art historical context. You know, the Miami Black Arts Workshop is one of the most significant Black collectives, Black artistic collectives in South Florida. But Black artistic collectives existed throughout the United States. There was, for example, Spiral in New York or Afrocobra in Chicago. So that was something else that was really able to be teased out in the discussion. Also the role of, you know, education. You know, one of the panelists, for example, had gone to Howard University and had studied painting under painters like Wadsworth Gerald, who are affiliated with Afrocobra. So I feel that the panel primarily combined art history, and history, but there were other sort of ways, you know, literature came up and music as well.
Great. No, that's really good to hear. And we were thrilled to support that and really ask those bigger, deeper, more broader questions about our human experience and to help people understand, yeah, how others live and how others see, and just to make us more empathetic, understanding people and neighbors. So that is super. And my other question for you, Amy, is actually, we've talked a lot about the funding opportunities that Florida Humanities has, but what are some other non-Florida Humanities funding opportunities that the attendees might like to know about that you've either seen that would be of helpful to just general arts organizations or that you've applied for yourself?
So in the last couple of years, we have been successful in obtaining grants from the Terra Foundation for American Art. And it's a national organization. It is really for more of an art museum, but if you have a collection, for example, and you're not specifically a museum, you might look into it. You know, years ago, the Terra Foundation was much more traditional in its funding choices, and they're really expanding. You know, I didn't know if our small academic museum could get one grant, much less 2 grants. And even when we went for the second grant recently, it was a collaboration with the Wolfsonian. And the Wolfsonian is a museum very focused on design, propaganda. And I remember someone saying to me, do you think you'll get a Terra Foundation grant? Because they're so traditional in what art is. And we were able to do that. I just saw they announced their next grant cycle for permanent collection installations. And one of our grants was for a permanent collection revamp, and we did receive $75,000 for it. So the process can be a little intensive, but much like our wonderful colleagues at the Florida Humanities Council, the Terra team will get on the phone with you and they can answer questions, and they can let you know, kind of how things are shaping up via email or on the phone. I don't know how many of you are here in Miami, but we've also, for the first time in our institution's history, we have received back-to-back Knight Challenge grants. The Knight Foundation is, such an important funder here in Miami. And, it started with me going to, they have a town hall session similar to the webinar that we're a part of, and really listening very specifically to what is it that they want. I'm sure like all of our institutions, we have so many different projects, but really aligning what are the projects that we're working on that match this specific funder the best. And then I'll just toss out one more is if you look into the Cornelia Bailey Foundation. They have been really generous in terms of funding art education. And lastly, I said one more, but I just thought of one more. If you are an art museum, if you can borrow works of art, I suggest looking into Art Bridges, which has an incredible program. You can borrow art from them, and you can also apply for funding to program that art.
Okay. No, those are all really good, Amy. And I bet our attendees are writing things down very speedily as you're talking too. So that's really great to hear. And maybe, Amy, I'll ask you if you could send me those list of foundations that you mentioned, and then I can also send that out to our attendees as well. And I'll also put a plug in for look to your local arts councils. That's what I mentioned are affiliates of the National Endowment for the Arts. Most oftentimes, they are likely also nonprofit, separate affiliate organizations like we are. And then also look to your local community foundations. While they may not be able to support your work, they may know of other local private family or larger foundations or charities that you could go to. I attend grantmaker professional conferences, and we're all just a big bunch of friendly group of people that are all trying to help each other. So sometimes if we hear of somebody who needs funding, but we're not going to be able to support them, we'll let another one of our funders know to look out for them. So don't be afraid to ask. It never hurts to ask. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie maybe and ask if she has any questions from the audience that we can address now.
We do. We have some really great questions. Before we get to the general ones, there was a specific one for Dr. Galpin, just asking about part of the breakdown of your cost. So in general, kind of how did you break down what you were requesting for with your grant? And then how did you compensate the participants in comparison to the scholar who was involved on your approved project?
Thank you for that question. We compensated everyone the same amount. So everyone received an honorarium for participating in the panel. And each person received an honorarium of $500. The film screening was a little bit less. It was $300 if I remember correctly. And then we also had an added cost for making that virtual tour powered by Matterport technology.
And I'll just jump on and say too, that's one method to do it is pay everybody the same. That certainly keeps it equal and equitable for all the different scholars and panelists. we also recognize that some scholars perhaps have an honoraria that's much larger, maybe 1,000. We've seen as much as $5,000. If they are a very large, big name speaker that you would like to bring in, that could be allowable. We look at all costs that are requested by Florida Humanities. It really all depends on the speaker. So just note that we recognize every project is unique, every person is unique in their experiences, and maybe what they have that they charge.
I think in general too, when we consider applications that are coming in, we don't have a set program. We don't have a set format that we're looking for. As Lindsay says, every application is unique. We're looking at what is being presented one by one, not in comparison to others, but just what's being presented. And so if the program isn't exactly as it was described today, that doesn't mean necessarily it's ineligible, but it's something that we would encourage you to reach out to us just to talk more about your ideas and how they do align with the humanities. Going along with the idea of scholars and kind of some of those questions, one question I'm going to try to answer, and Lindsay, you can jump in as well. For community project grants, but probably for really any applications coming in, can we submit the biographies or the bios in lieu of resumes for artists? A lot of our artists don't have formal resumes, and bios are more commonly used across various artistic disciplines. We have seen that. A good bio that explains an artist's body of work and how it is relevant to the programming or the exhibition in relation to the program that is happening would be acceptable. The evaluation team really just wants to see who they are, where their work has brought them, how it's brought them to this point, and how that's relevant overall to what you're presenting in your program.
Yep, Stephanie, I would agree with you. Bios are perfectly fine if that's what they have. We don't want people going out there and creating resumes or CVs if they don't typically have one. We're not hard and fast about that rule. What exactly like Stephanie says, we just need to see what their qualifications are. So if that serves that purpose, that is fine.
Similar lines, do we have any recommendations? As this person is asking us, are there any recommendations of where to find humanities scholars beyond universities, and what's the best way to approach them?
Good question. So outside of universities, look to if you have any nonprofit organizations like historical societies, cultural centers in your community that have, that really speak to or deal with the topic that you're interested in diving into a little bit more. Maybe there's, for example, like a literature consortium, people who study African American literature, for example, and they have a special interest group in your local city. Historical societies are the most common non-professor location to find humanities scholars, but if there's museums, cultural organizations, arts organizations, if they have a PhD or a master's, that higher level degree in a humanities discipline, that's allowable. So I will say the most important thing that I probably said there is higher degree in a humanities discipline. Just because they have a PhD in any discipline does not make them a humanities scholar necessarily. So if you have any questions, does this person qualify? Please feel free to send me an email. My email is listed on the top one right there, lmorrison@flahum.org. And I'm happy to let you know my feedback on that.
We have a couple questions related to formats. I'm gonna generalize it that way. So could this, and I think that's really any applicable funding opportunities, could they fund a cultural arts master's plan? And the example is a plan that would include research and direct interaction with residents that develops a greater understanding of the community's histories and desires.
Good question. So it sounds like what you perhaps want to do, if I'm understanding it correctly, is to have a series of roundtables or community conversations where you're soliciting feedback from the community and then helping compile a document, like a strategic plan or just a plan in general that helps assess where your organization wants to go. If that roundtable or that community conversation is accessible to and open to the broader general public, and if you have humanities scholars involved to maybe start off and contextualize the conversation or the workshop, then that could be allowable because that would be a public humanities programming. However, if what you want to do is more of a roundtable working group, like a focus group maybe is another word, that's limited to only people that you are inviting, then that wouldn't be open to the general public, and that unfortunately would not be eligible for funding. We also don't strictly support research or publications. So the creation of a document or a manuscript without that broader public engagement component would not be eligible for funding. So the key that our evaluators look for is, are you involving the broader population in the humanities discipline? Is it open to the general public?
I think too, within that, when we look at projects where there are a lot of conversations, sometimes they're limited because of safety regulations or things that are happening, or just, things that come up in the process of any event. So there have been opportunities, I think, Lindsay, that where we've seen a collection of like oral histories collected, or a process where it culminates in a large event, so that all of that can be discussed. And so you could have multi-steps within the project you're working on, and we can help you kind of narrow down which areas we're able to fund within that project.
Yep.
And then one of our other questions is, this person's organization is hosting an inaugural poetry festival featuring prominent poets and visual artists. So is one of the grants applicable for them? There would be workshops, talkbacks, panel discussions. It sounds like a lot of community engagement around poetry and visual arts.
Yes. So the grant you'll want to look into is the Community Project Grants Program. We have supported poetry festivals in the past, poetry workshops. The key here is poetry is kind of, and there's no black and white world when it comes to the humanities, which sometimes is challenging, but their poetry kind of exists in between the arts and the humanities. It can be seen as artistic expression, spoken word, but it can also analyze and really dive deep into a certain topic. So my recommendation, and this is what I've seen evaluators speak to time and time again on poetry related projects, is involve additional humanities scholars, like a professor of history, to be in conversation with that poet, maybe after they present on their spoken word, and kind of get at those bigger, deeper questions around humanities disciplines and the humanities as a whole. So we could support a poetry festival or a workshop, but again, just involving that humanities scholarship and providing an opportunity to discuss and talk back with the general public is what we'll look for there.
And we did have one other question come in that they had found the answer online as we were chatting, but I thought it was worth repeating. This particular person works for a city government within the Cultural Affairs Division. So is that are they eligible to apply?
Yeah, let's pause and actually talk about eligibility, because that's a good question. So yes, city governments are eligible for funding. Public institutions, local municipalities are eligible, as are nonprofit organizations and cultural institutions, like colleges and universities, just general not-for-profit organizations. So you do not have to have a 501c3 status to apply. You just have to be constituted for nonprofit purposes. So that's one note. I'll also say who is not eligible, who is ineligible. We do not give grants to individuals. So individual artists are not eligible to apply. And then of course, not for-profit organizations. So if you are an individual artist watching this webinar, maybe look to a local nonprofit organization who aligns with what you are intending to do, to be the sponsoring organization and apply for your grant. They would receive the funds, they would manage the funds. Their project director would have to come from that organization, but you could be a partner on that project. And I'll also say too, I see another question added in, but we're really doing a surface level look at the different grant programs we have and talking about just how the arts and humanities can be aligned, and there can be great synergy between them in Florida humanities funded projects. But do take a look at the webinars we have that specifically speak to those grant programs. They go into cost share, things that are allowable in the budget, the narrative questions within the applications, more examples of types of things we fund. So this is not meant to cover everything here, so I want just to let you know about those resources in our webinar platform.
And that question that just popped in is, how quickly are grants approved after application? Which is, if you do have the opportunity to watch a tips and trick webinar, we do go much more in depth about the application process, but it does take a little bit of time. So let Lindsay explain that.
Yeah, just a tiny bit of time. It's actually a lot quicker. If you've applied for state funding before, you'll know that sometimes it can be a year after you're awarded funding that you receive the funding. But for example, the July 20th deadline, if you apply for that, the review period on our end, the evaluation panel happens between July 21st and then the very end of August, and you will find out September 1 if you are awarded or denied. So it's just 6 weeks that you wait between the deadline date and when we let you know that you are awarded or denied. And as soon as that notification date happens on September 1, that's also your contract start date, and you have 1 year to complete your project. All you have to do is sign the contract, request 90% of your award, a few other things like make sure you have a unique entity ID number through SAM, and then you're good to go. So we do want to get these funds quickly out the door to you, but since we are the steward of these federal dollars, we just have to make sure certain compliance principles are followed.
That looks like all the questions that we have today, but if you have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. We are here to help. And that's, I think, one of the things I love most working for Florida Humanities is how much we do try to communicate with applicants, potential applicants, and just make sure that you're on the right track and that we can have successful grants or applications come through.
Absolutely, Stephanie. Yeah, we're very happy and here to help. We want to consider we're friendly grant makers. So we're here to help you. We consider ourselves also a gateway grant. We're a great first step if you haven't applied for a larger NEA or NEH grant yet, or a larger state grant. Ours are really more easy, I guess, to manage and to receive. So again, I want to thank Amy so much for attending today. We sincerely enjoyed having you on and your expertise to talk more about your grant. And Stephanie, thank you so much for joining. And we look forward to talking with all you attendees in the future. So thank you.